I want to take you on a journey, an exciting journey that could completely change the way you think about life, money, and success. What I'm about to share with you isn't just a story. It's a lesson, one that has transformed millions of lives, including my own. We're talking about Rich Dad, Poor Dad, one of the most powerful and eye-opening books ever written about achieving financial freedom. Picture this. You're a young boy or girl growing up and watching the adults around you. One says, study hard, get a good job, and save your money. The other says, learn how money works, make it work for you, and build wealth. Two completely different philosophies. Which one would you follow? This was the life of Robert Kiyosaki, the author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. He had two father figures in his life, two men with opposite mindsets about success and money. He called them his poor dad and his rich dad. Poor dad was his biological father, a well-educated man with a respectable job. He worked as a teacher and believed that success came from working hard, getting good grades, and climbing the career ladder. But despite his education, poor dad struggled. He lived paycheck to paycheck, constantly stressed about bills, and believed that talking about money was somehow wrong. Rich Dad, on the other hand, wasn't highly educated. He didn't hold a fancy degree or a government position, but he possessed something far more valuable, financial intelligence. He owned businesses, made investments, and believed that financial education mattered more than formal education. He said, "Don't work for money, make money work for you." Now imagine being a young Robert, standing between these two mentors. Both loved him. Both gave him advice. But their advice couldn't be more different. Poor Dad said, get a stable job, that's security. Rich Dad said, create jobs, that's freedom. Poor Dad said, money is the root of all evil. Rich Dad said, the lack of money is the root of all evil. Robert was torn. He respected both men, but he couldn't ignore what he saw. Poor Dad, despite his intelligence, was always anxious about money. Rich Dad, though less educated, was always calm, confident, and in control. One day, Robert asked Rich Dad, "Why are you so confident about money?" Rich Dad smiled and said, "Because I understand how it works. Most people don't. They work for money their whole lives, but never learn how to make it work for them." That one sentence changed everything. It planted a seed, a curiosity, that grew into a lifelong mission. Robert decided to learn from Rich Dad, to understand his principles, and to walk in his footsteps. Now, pause for a moment and think, isn't this the story of most of us? We're taught to go to school, get a job, and save for retirement. But has anyone ever really taught us how to manage money? How to grow it? How to escape the endless cycle of working just to pay bills? Your mindset about money shapes your destiny. If you see money as something evil or dangerous, you'll always struggle with it. But if you see it as a tool, something you can master, grow, and use to create impact, you unlock the door to freedom and opportunity. Think about it. If you had two roads ahead of you, one leading to financial struggle and the other to financial independence, wouldn't you want to know which one to take? That's exactly what we're going to uncover today. Rich Dad kept teaching Robert, and every conversation opened his mind wider than before. Until one day, Rich Dad said something Robert would never forget. The rich don't work for money. Robert was confused. What do you mean? He asked. Isn't money the reason people work? Rich Dad smiled again. No, Robert. The poor and middle class work for money, but the rich, they make money work for them. That's the difference. And that's where everything began to change. When you're young, you go to school. You're taught to study hard, get good grades, and eventually land a good job. Once you get that job, you start working hard to earn money. With that money, you buy things, a house, a car, maybe even some luxuries. But those things come with bills, mortgages, loans, taxes, and endless repairs. So you work even harder to pay for them. And before you know it, it never ends. Rich Dad paused, then said something that struck Robert deeply. People think they're working for financial security, but in reality, they're working for their boss, the government, and the bank. The harder they work, the deeper they fall into this trap. That's why most people never escape the rat race. To explain, Rich Dad gave an example. Imagine a man named John, he said. John earns $3,000 a month. After a few years, he gets a raise and starts earning $4,000. What does he do? Instead of saving or investing, he buys a bigger house, a newer car, a better phone. His lifestyle grows, but so do his expenses. Now, John has to work even harder just to keep up, and this cycle keeps him trapped forever. Robert nodded quietly. He realized this was exactly what his poor dad had been doing his entire life. Then Rich Dad asked, Robert, do you know what financial freedom really means? Robert shook his head. Rich Dad smiled and said, financial freedom means having enough income from your assets or investments to cover your living expenses. When you reach that point, you don't have to work unless you choose to. Your money starts working for you. He continued, people think being rich means earning a high salary, but even someone earning a lot can still be broke if their expenses keep growing. True wealth doesn't come from how much you earn. It comes from what you own that earns for you. That's when Rich Dad taught Robert one of the most powerful lessons of his life, the difference between assets and liabilities. He said, an asset is something that puts money into your pocket, even when you're not working. A liability is something that takes money out of your pocket. Then, Rich Dad gave two simple examples. Case 1, buying a car. A young man saves $10,000 and buys a car. That car needs fuel, maintenance, and insurance. Over time, it loses value. That's a liability because it takes money out of his pocket. Case 2, investing in property. Another man saved the same $10,000 but buys a small piece of land. He rents it out for $200 a month. Over time, the land's value increases, and it keeps generating income. That's an asset because it puts money into his pocket. Robert was amazed. He realized how often people confuse liabilities for assets. A house, a car, even expensive clothes. They may look like wealth, but they don't generate income. They drain it. Rich Dad said, the rich buy assets first. They invest in things that make money for them. Businesses, real estate, stocks, and even education that improves their skills. These assets create passive income. Once they have enough, they can buy luxuries without worrying about money. To make it even clearer, Rich Dad gave another example. Imagine two families, he said. Both earn $5,000 a month. Family A spends everything, rent, food, entertainment, and ends a month with nothing. Family B spends $4,000 and invests the remaining $1,000 in stocks. Over time, those investments grow, and soon they earn $500 a month in dividends. Eventually, that passive income becomes large enough to cover all their expenses. Family B becomes financially free. Family A stays stuck in a rat race. Robert was starting to understand. It wasn't about how much you earned. It was about how wisely you managed what you had. Rich Dad told him, most people think, I can't afford it. But the rich ask, how can I afford it? That small change in mindset makes a massive difference. When you say, I can't afford it, your brain shuts down. But when you ask, how can I afford it? Your brain starts searching for solutions. Then, Rich Dad gave Robert a challenge. Whenever you want something but think you can't afford it, he said. Rich Dad continued, when you think you can't afford something, don't stop there. Instead, write down 3 ways you could make it happen. Maybe you could cut unnecessary expenses. Maybe you could start a small side hustle. Or maybe you could learn a new skill that pays more. This simple exercise, Rich Dad said, will train your mind to think like the rich, to look for solutions instead of excuses. But Robert was still unsure. He looked at Rich Dad and asked, "What if I lose my money?" Rich Dad smiled. "That," he said, "is the difference between the rich and the poor. The poor are afraid of losing money, so they never take risks. The rich understand that failure is part of learning. When they make mistakes, they don't give up. They learn, adjust, and try again." Then Rich Dad shared a clear plan with Robert, a roadmap for building wealth, even with limited money. Step 1, track your expenses. Write down everything you spend for an entire month. You'll be surprised by how much goes to things you don't really need. Cut the unnecessary. Step 2, start small. Don't wait for a huge opportunity. Begin with small investments, maybe a stock, a savings account, or even a skill course that gives returns. Step 3, learn every day. Read books. Attend seminars. Find mentors who understand money and can guide you. Step 4, build assets first. Before you spend on luxuries, buy assets. Rental properties, small businesses, stocks, or digital projects that earn even when you sleep. Step 5, reinvest profits. When your investments start earning, don't rush to spend it. Reinvest it. Let your money grow faster. Let it multiply. As Robert began applying Rich Dad's advice, something shifted inside him. He no longer saw money as something to be spent immediately. He saw it as a tool to create more opportunities, more freedom. Slowly but surely, his mindset began to change, from scarcity to abundance, from fear to strategy. Rich Dad's lessons were starting to reshape Robert's life, one small step at a time. Then one day, Rich Dad said something that took their lessons to a deeper level. To become truly wealthy, he said, you must first learn how to control your emotions. Robert frowned. "What do emotions have to do with money?" he asked. Rich Dad smiled. "Everything," he said. "Most people let fear and greed control their financial decisions. Those two emotions are the reason most people stay poor." He explained, "Fear is what keeps people stuck in jobs they hate. They're afraid they won't have enough to pay the bills, so they choose safety over growth. They trade freedom for a paycheck." Rich Dad leaned forward. "Imagine someone who dreams of starting a business, but doesn't. Why? Because they're afraid. Afraid of failing. Afraid of losing money. Afraid of being judged. So they stay in a job that pays just enough to survive, but never enough to thrive." He paused and said softly, "The rich feel fear too, but they don't let it stop them. They understand that fear is normal, but action is what creates change. If you want to succeed, you must feel the fear and move forward anyway." Then Rich Dad talked about greed, the second emotion that traps people. Greed, he said, makes people chase things instead of freedom. They think, if I buy this car, I'll look successful. If I buy this big house, people will respect me. But those things only create more stress, more bills, and more pressure. He looked Robert in the eyes and said, "True happiness doesn't come from owning things. It comes from freedom. Freedom to do what you love. Freedom to spend time with people who matter. Freedom to live life on your terms. And that freedom only comes from building assets, not from spending money on things you don't need." Then Rich Dad added one final truth. If you want to control your emotions, you need knowledge. Most people are afraid of money because they don't understand it. They don't know how to invest, so they avoid it. They don't know how taxes work, so they overpay. They don't know how to grow wealth, so they stay poor. He encouraged Robert to start learning 3 key things. 1, investments. Understand how stocks, real estate, and other assets grow your money. 2, taxes. Learn how the rich legally pay less by using smart, strategic systems. 3, the market. Know when to buy and when to sell. and how to recognize opportunities others miss. Rich Dad concluded, "The more you know, the less afraid you'll be. Knowledge is what turns fear into confidence, and confidence is what leads to freedom. Knowledge," Rich Dad said, "gives you power over your fear." One of his most powerful lessons was about changing how you see money. He told Robert, "Stop thinking like a consumer. Start thinking like an investor." He gave an example. Imagine you earn $1,000. A consumer will spend it on clothes, gadgets, or entertainment. An investor will ask, "How can I use this $1,000 to make more money?" Maybe they'll buy stocks. Maybe they'll start a small business. Or maybe they'll invest in a course to learn a new skill. Over time, the investor's money grows, while the consumer's money slowly disappears. Rich Dad taught Robert to see opportunities others overlook. He said, "Most people don't recognize opportunities because they're too busy working, spending, or worrying. The rich are always looking for chances to grow their wealth." Then he gave Robert a challenge. When you walk down the street, don't just look at the shops. Ask yourself, how could I own one of these? What does this business need to succeed? Train your mind to think like an owner, not just a customer. Robert started practicing this every day, and soon he began to see the world differently. He noticed small cafes for sale, old houses that could be renovated and rented out, even websites that could grow into businesses. Opportunities were everywhere. They had always been there. He had just never learned to look for them. But as Robert began applying Rich Dad's lessons, doubt started coming from everywhere. People told him, "You're too young to invest. That's too risky. Be realistic, get a safe job." Even his poor dad, out of love, warned him, "Focus on security, not dreams." Rich Dad smiled and said, "Robert, people will always criticize what they don't understand. But remember, they're speaking from their own fears, not yours. If you listen to them, you'll live like them, trapped in the rat race." To build assets and to create the life he had always dreamed of. Then, after many lessons, Rich Dad looked at him and said, "Now, Robert, you're ready for the most important truth about becoming wealthy. Success is not about luck or talent. It's about something far greater." Robert leaned in, his curiosity burning brighter than ever. Rich Dad's voice grew calm yet commanding. "Many people dream of becoming rich," he said, "but very few ever move beyond the dream. They wait for the perfect time, the perfect plan, the perfect idea. But the truth is there is no perfect time. The best time to begin is now." He leaned back and smiled. "Let me give you an example," he continued. "Imagine two friends. One keeps saying, 'I'll start saving and investing when I earn more money.' The other begins right away, saving just $10 a week. 10 years later, the second friend has built a small fortune, while the first is still waiting for the right time." Rich Dad's eyes locked on Robert. "Opportunities are everywhere," he said firmly, "but only those who act on them ever see results. Don't wait until you feel ready. Start with what you have." Then he paused and added, "And remember this, failure isn't the opposite of success. It's part of it." He told Robert a story about a businessman who started 5 companies, all of which failed. People laughed at him, called him foolish. But he didn't stop. On his 6th try, he built a company that changed his life forever. Rich Dad smiled again. Do you think he would have succeeded if he had quit after his first failure? Robert shook his head slowly. The lesson hit deep. Rich Dad continued, his tone sharpening with purpose. Self-discipline, he said, is the foundation of financial freedom. It's easy to spend money, but it takes strength to save and invest it. He looked Robert straight in the eyes. Always pay yourself first, he said. Even when you have bills, even when money is tight, Set aside a portion for savings or investments before you spend on anything else. This habit, he added, forces you to become creative and resourceful. It builds the discipline you'll need to grow real wealth. Then his voice softened. Most people, he said, let doubt control their lives. They let fear make their decisions. But your thoughts shape your reality. If you focus on your fears, you'll find reasons to fail. If you focus on your dreams, you'll find ways to succeed. As their lesson drew to an end, Rich Dad shared one final, surprising truth. The richest people, he said, are often the ones who give the most. Robert frowned, a little puzzled. How does giving make you richer? He asked. Rich Dad smiled. Because when you give, you create value. You build trust. You attract opportunity. Whether it's sharing knowledge, mentoring someone, or donating to a cause, giving multiplies your success. He told Robert about a wealthy man who created a scholarship fund for underprivileged students. That single act of generosity changed hundreds of lives, and in return brought the man immense joy, recognition, and partnerships that opened new doors to business and impact. Then Rich Dad gave his final piece of advice, short, simple, unforgettable. The moment you stop learning, he said, you stop growing. Years later, Robert would look back on that moment and realize how deeply those words had shaped his life. He had built wealth, not just in money, but in freedom, confidence, and the power to lift others. He shared this message with the world. No matter where you are in life, you have the power to change your future. It doesn't matter if you're starting with nothing. What matters is your mindset and your willingness to take action. Wealth isn't just about money. It's about creating a life where you can follow your passion, help others, and live without regret. So as you reach the end of this story, remember this. Your journey to financial freedom begins today. Start small. Stay consistent. Learn from your failures. Dream big. And never, ever give up. Because the only limits to your success are the ones you place on yourself. The world is full of opportunities, waiting for you to take the first step. Your time is now. Make it count.